The declaration came like a punch to the gut. The Galactic Alliance official broadcast echoed through the command deck, the grim voice of Councillor Deleith cutting through the tense silence. Effective immediately, Earth and its surrounding orbital zones are designated as a no-go zone. All vessels, civilian and military, are prohibited from entering Terran space. Violations will be met with Alliance intervention. We have lost the 1000th ship. The risk is too great. I leaned back in my chair, the screen casting a faint blue glow across my face. It felt surreal. 1,000 ships? 1,000 vanished crews. And the Alliance, my employer, was throwing in the towel? Cowards, I muttered under my breath. Behind me, the clack of taloned feet echoed. Cowards, perhaps. Zarash Viklor chirped in his usual dry tone. But practical ones. I wouldn't risk my species' survival for your world's enigma either, Harlow. I turned to face him. Zarash's insectoid frame caught the dim light, his violet eyes gleaming with what I guessed was amusement. The Kraliak biologist had a knack for downplaying the stakes. They didn't vanish by accident, I said, standing and pacing across the deck. Something is pulling them in, something they don't want us to find. Speculation, Zarash said, flickering his mandibles dismissively. Your species thrives on it. Perhaps the ships succumb to Earth's gravitational anomalies, or its infamous storms, or... He paused for dramatic effect. Ghosts. I stopped, glaring at him. You think this is funny? No, he replied, his tone suddenly serious. I think it's dangerous, and you're obsessed. Obsessed wasn't far off the mark. Earth had been my home once, before the Council cut us off, before the disappearances. Before my time in the Terran Space Corps ended in disgrace, if the galaxy had written Earth off, then I had to be the one to find the truth. You didn't have to come, I reminded him. Zarash made a soft chittering noise that I'd come to realize as a Kraliak sigh. No, but curiosity compels us both, and I still owe you for that incident on Darlax 4. Before I could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room. The holographic projector flickered to life, and a sleek, humanoid figure materialized. Finch, my ship's AI, crossed its arms and tilted its head in mock exasperation. You two done bickering? Finch's voice was dry, laced with artificial sarcasm. Because we're nearing the anomaly. Sensors are picking up the increased electromagnetic activity around Earth's orbit. The place is lit up like a festival. Define lit up, I said, stepping to the console. Unstable energy signatures, radiation spikes, and... Finch hesitated, something it rarely did. And a repeating signal. Old Terran code. I glanced at Zarash. He shrugged, though his mandibles twitched nervously. Play it, I ordered. Finch's projection flickered and a low rhythmic pulse filled the room. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from static, but it carried an unmistakable pattern, a distress beacon. No ship's been cleared to leave Earth in decades, I muttered. Where is it coming from? Orbital trajectory suggests one of the derelict sites, Finch replied. But here's the kicker. It's broadcasting in a language no one's spoken in centuries. Old Earth tech, Zarash said, his voice tinged with unease. Primitive. Dangerous. Then it's right up my alley, I said, strapping myself into the pilot seat. Finch, take us in. The view from the cockpit was haunting. Earth's once busy orbital stations hung in the void like ghost ships. Their hulls pitted with debris. The planet itself loomed below, shrouded in swirling storms that glowed faintly with unnatural light. This gives me the creeps, Finch said. Stay focused, I said, adjusting the ship's trajectory. What's the source of the beacon? Locking in on it now, Finch said. It's coming from an old Terran satellite. Should be derelict, but... But what? It's moving. I froze. Moving? As in operational? As in not where it should be, Finch said. It's adjusting its orbit to match ours.
That's impossible,
Zarash interjected.
Terran satellites were rudimentary at best. They couldn't...
A sudden jolt cut him off. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as the lights dimmed.
What the hell was that?
I shouted.
We're caught in some kind of energy field,
Finch said, its voice strained.
It's pulling us towards the satellite.
I wrestled with the controls, but they were unresponsive. The ship lurched again, and a bright flash filled the cockpit. When the light faded, we were no longer alone. The satellite hovered just meters away, its surface pulsing with an eerie blue glow.
That's not Terran tech,
Zarash said, his voice barely above a whisper.
No kidding,
Finch replied.
Whatever it is, it's scanning us.
The ship's system flickered, and a distorted voice crackled through the comms.
Terran vessel. Identify.
I exchanged a glance with Zarash, then leaned forward. This is Commander Adrian Harlow of the Resolute. Who am I speaking to? There was a pause. Then the voice returned, clearer this time.
Access denied. Protocol active. Leave the system.
Not happening, I said. What protocol? Who's running it? The satellite's glow intensified. The energy field around the ship tightened. Finch's voice cutting through the chaos.
Adrian, this thing's tapping into our systems. If it finishes, it'll fry us.
Options.
I'm working on it.
The ship jolted again, and the lights dimmed further. Zarash hissed, his mandibles clicking nervously.
Enough!
I shouted. Finch, cut the feed, override whatever it's doing!
On it!
Finch said. Its hologram vanished, replaced by a cascade of code on the console. Seconds stretched into eternity as the ship groaned under the strain. Finally, the ship energy field flickered and collapsed, and the satellite drifted away, its glow fading.
Systems are stable,
Finch said, reappearing.
Barely.
What the hell was that? I asked.
A warning,
Zarash said.
And a clear one at that. Something or someone doesn't want us here.
Back in the main cabin, Finch displayed a scan of the satellite. Its design was unmistakably Terran, but the modifications were beyond anything I'd seen.
Whatever's running it, it's not human,
Finch said.
Could it be Luthane tech?
Zarash suggested. The name sent a chill down my spine. The Luthane were a boogeyman in the galactic lore, an ancient race capable of bending reality. If they were involved, Earth's isolation may have been intentional.
It's too advanced, even for them,
Finch replied.
This is something else.
Something human, I said.
Impossible,
Zarash said. I ignored him, focusing on the data Finch had recovered. Among the corrupted files was a single unencrypted log. I played it, and a voice echoed through the cabin.
This is Director Haraway. If you're hearing this, the Haven Protocol is active. Earth is secure. But the cost? Too high. Do not return. Do not...
The recording cut off, leaving only static.
Haven Protocol?
Finch mused.
That's not in any Terran records.
It's a lead, I said, and we're following it. As we prepared for our descent towards Earth, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into something far bigger than ourselves. The disappearances, the beacon, the Haven Protocol. Each piece hinted at a truth buried beneath Earth's storms and silence. For the first time in decades, humanity's lost home was within reach, and I wasn't turning back. The derelict station loomed like a skeletal giant against the backdrop of Earth's swirling storm system. Its massive arms, once bustling with Terran shuttles and drones, hung limp and lifeless, casting long shadows over the jagged debris field that surrounded it, the name etched into its corroded hull. Eterna Station. Barely remained legible. as if time itself wanted to erase its existence.
We're really doing this,
Zarash muttered, his mandibles clicking nervously as he studied the station through the viewport. Got a better idea? I asked, double-checking the readings on my console.
Certainly,
he replied.
We could leave, live, avoid being torn apart by whatever death world insanity your people have left behind.
Finch's hologram materialized beside me, hand on its hips in mock exasperation.
Oh, come on, Zarash. Where's your sense of adventure? We've got a haunted house in space, cryptic warnings, and Adrian's trademark reckless determination. What's not to love?
I shot Finch a glare. Focus! Are we good to dock? Finch's smirk faded.
Mostly. The ship's station's automated docking systems are responding, but they're patchy at best. I'll need to sync manually.
Do it, I said. Zarash, suit up, we're heading in. The Resolute docked with a jolt that rattled through its frame, the station's umbilical port locking into place like an ancient, rusted jaw. A faint hiss echoed through the airlock as pressure equalized, followed by the hum of Finch's voice in our helmets.
Atmosphere's thin but breathable. Life support's running at skeleton levels. No heat signatures, at least none that make sense.
That's reassuring, Zarash muttered, his voice tinged with sarcasm. I ignored him, stepping through the airlock and into the station. The corridor stretched out before us, a narrow tunnel of corroded metal and flickering lights. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting into unnatural shapes that seemed to retreat as we advanced.
Why does it feel like we're being watched?
Zarash whispered, his violet eyes darting around the corridor. Because we probably are, I replied. The command center was a relic of another time. Massive consoles lined the walls, their screens dark and covered in a thick layer of dust. A central holotable stood dormant, its surface cracked and pitted.
This place is a tomb,
Zarash said, his antenna twitching with unease.
Not quite,
Finch interjected. It had synced with the station's systems, its holograms flickering faintly as it accessed the controls.
Looks like someone tried to wipe the records, but fragments remain. Give me a minute.
I turned to Zarash. Start scanning for biosignatures. Let's see if anyone, or anything, left its mark here. Zarash hesitated, but nodded, his multi-faced eyes narrowing as he activated his handheld scanner. As Finch worked, the station groaned a deep, metallic rumble that reverberated through the floor.
That's not ominous,
Finch quipped. It's the structure settling, I said, even though I didn't believe my own words.
Got something,
Zarash suddenly said, his voice tight.
Biosignatures in the next section. Faint, but recent.
Human? I asked.
Hard to say,
he replied.
But whatever it is, it's moving.
We followed the scanner's readings through a series of winding corridors, each one more darker and decayed than the last. The air grew heavy, the faint smell of ozone and rust pressing against my senses.
Getting closer,
Zarash whispered. The corridor opened into a large chamber, its walls lined with glass tubes. Most were shattered, their contents long gone, but a few remained intact, filled with a viscous green liquid that glowed faintly in the dim light.
What the hell is this?
I muttered, stepping closer to one of the intact tubes. Inside floated the mummified remains of a human figure, its body twisted and scarred.
Cryopreservation,
Zarash said, his voice laced with a mix of fascination and horror.
But crude, experimental. These people were not meant to wake up.
Before I could respond, a low hum filled the chamber, and the tube's glow intensified.
Something's activating,
Finch said, its hologram flickering in and out.
Energy readings are spiking!
A hiss echoed through the room as one of the tubes cracked open, spilling its contents onto the floor. The figure inside, a gaunt, skeletal man, collapsed to its knees, gasping for air.
Stand down!
I shouted, drawing my sidearm. The man looked up, his eyes wild and sunken. his voice a hoarse whisper. "You shouldn't be here." It took several tense minutes to calm the man down. His name was Lieutenant Jacob Vance, a survivor from Earth's days before its isolation. He was one of the few stationed on Eterna when the Haven Protocol was activated. "You're Tehran?" he asked, his gaze locked onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I am," I replied. "Commander Adrian Harlow." Vance slowly nodded, his expression a mix of relief and despair. "Then you know what this place is." "I'm here to find out," I said. Vance leaned back, his movements sluggish and pained. "Eterna was a lifeboat. We were supposed to ride out the storm, keep watch while Earth healed. But the protocol wasn't perfect. He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the shattered tubes around us. "We were the lucky ones." "What about the beacon?" I asked. "Why is it active?" "It's a warning," Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The protocol is failing, and if it does..." The station shuddered violently, cutting him off. Finch's voice crackled in our comms.
Guys, we got a problem. The station's systems are coming online, and they're not happy we're here.
"What's happening?" Zarash asked.
Defense systems, Finch replied. Automated drones, internal lockdowns, the works. We've got to move.
The station became a war zone. Drones poured out of the walls, their sleek, insect-like forms glinting in the dim light as they fired energy bolts that scorched the metal walls. "Run!" I shouted, taking point as we ducked and weaved through the labyrinth corridors. Zarash's scanner beeped frantically, guiding us towards the docking bay. Vance struggled to keep up, his body weak from decades of cryostasis. "We're not gonna make it!" Zarash hissed as a bolt grazed his shoulder, sending him tumbling. "Yes, we are," I growled, dragging him to his feet. Finch's voice cut through the chaos.
Heads up! I'm deactivating the airlocks to slow them down. Hold your breath.
The air thinned instantly, the hiss of decompression drowning out the sound of our pounding footsteps. The drones faltered, their movements erratic as the sudden vacuum disrupted their systems. We reached the docking bay just as the Resolute's airlock cycle opened. I shoved Vance and Zarash inside, firing a few wild shots to cover our escape before slamming on the controls. "Punch it, Finch!" I shouted. The ship's engine roared to life as we blasted away from the station, the drones swarming after us like angry wasps. Back on the Resolute, Vance sat slumped in a chair, his breathing shallow but steady.
We're clear,
Finch said, its hologram reappearing.
Barely. That station's defenses were no joke.
"What's the damage?" I asked.
Minimal,
Finch replied.
But we didn't get everything. The data fragments I pulled point to a facility on Earth's surface. Something called Haven.
Vance's eyes snapped open at the name. "You can't go there." "Why not?" I asked. "Because Haven is the heart of the protocol," Vance said. "And if it's waking up, then the nightmare we locked away with it is waking up with it." The descent through Earth's atmosphere was nothing short of chaos. The planet's storms had only grown stronger over the years, each tempest a rolling titan that lashed at us with lightning and debris. The Resolute shuddered violently, its shields flaring under the assault.
Brace yourselves!
Finch barked, its voice crackling through the intercom. I gripped the armrests of my seat as the ship buckled like a wild animal. Beside me, Zarash clung to the console, his mandibles clicking nervously. Vance strapped into a crash seat, pale and sweating, his body still weakened from the decades in cryo.
"Your planet is trying to kill us!"
Zarash hissed. "That's just her saying hello," I muttered, though my knuckles turned white as the turbulence worsened. Finch's hologram appeared on the main display, its expression grim.
"We're approaching Haven's coordinates, but the storms are making pinpoint navigation impossible. I'll need to bring us down manually."
"Do what you have to," I said. The ship plunged through the storm layer, and the world below came into view. A barren, wind-swept wasteland of jagged rocks and ash. Thunderclouds roiled above, their dark masses occasionally illuminated by sickly green lightning. In the distance, a towering structure loomed, barely visible through the haze. A monolithic silhouette that seemed to pierce the sky.
"There it is,"
Finch said. "Haven." The Resolute landed with a jarring thud, its landing strut sinking slightly into the ash-covered ground. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the acrid smell of sulfur and decay. "We're really doing this," Zarash muttered, checking his gear. "Stick close and keep your scanner ready," I said, grabbing my rifle. Vance struggled to his feet, his movements shaky. "Haven is not what it seems," he said, his voice hoarse. "It was meant to protect us, but it became something else. Be ready for anything." Finn's voice chimed in over our comms.
Atmosphere's toxic, but manageable with your suits. Radiation levels are elevated but stable. Let's not linger longer than necessary.
With that, we stepped out into the wasteland. The journey to Haven was grueling. The terrain was a maze of jagged rocks and fissures. The ground unsteady beneath our feet. The wind carried ash that clung to our suits, and every step felt heavier than the last. As we approached the structure, its true scale became apparent. Haven was colossal, a fortress of blackened metal and reinforced concrete that stretched skyward like a defiant monument. Its surface was marred by scars and burn marks, evidence of battles long past.
"This is no ordinary facility,"
Zarash said, his violet eyes scanning the structure.
"It's a fortress."
It had to be. Haven was Earth's last line of defense. The protocol wasn't just a shield. It was a weapon. We reached a massive doorway, its surface etched with faded symbols that resemble old Terran script. Finch's voice crackled in my helmet.
I'm detecting a control panel nearby. Looks like the door's powered down, but the systems are still intact. I can bypass it.
"Make it quick," I said, my eyes scanning the horizon. Storm clouds were closing in, and the wind carried an unsettling hum that set my nerves on edge. The door groaned as it slid open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched deep into the facility. The air inside was heavy and stale, filled with the faint scent of ozone and oil.
"This place is alive,"
Zarash whispered, his antennae twitching.
Not alive,
Finch corrected.
just waiting. The systems here are running on a skeleton grid, conserving power for something.
The corridor led to a central chamber, its walls lined with massive screens and control panels. At the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a sphere of pulsating energy. "That's the lock," Vance said, his voice reverent. I stepped closer, the hum of the sphere filling the air. "This is what the protocol was protecting?" "Yes," Vance replied. "The reality lock. It's what keeps the Luthane trapped, but its power is failing." As Finch interfaced with the facility's systems, the screens flickered to life, displaying fragmented logs and schematics. Images of Earth's last days played out in ghostly detail. Cities engulfed in fire, skies torn apart by alien ships, humanity's desperate final stand.
The Luthane weren't just invaders,
Finch said, its voice heavy.
They were something else. Something that broke the laws of reality itself.
"Dimensional manipulation,"
Zrash said, his tone hushed.
"They didn't just attack, they warped our existence."
"That's why the lock was created," Vance explained. "To sever our dimension from theirs, but it came at a cost." One screen displayed a map of Earth, overlaid with energy readings. The storms, the anomalies, they were all connected to the lock.
The lock is destabilizing,
Finch said.
If it collapses, the barrier between dimensions will fall.
"What happens then?"
Zrash asked. "The Luthane come back," Vance replied. As we delved deeper into the facility, the signs of decay became more pronounced. Walls were cracked and stained, and the faint hum of the lock grew louder, its rhythm uneven. We reached a massive chamber, its floors etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. At the center stood a pedestal similar to the one in the command chamber, but this one was surrounded by machinery that pulsed with a sickly green light. "This is the core," Vance said, "the heart of the lock." Finch scanned the machinery, its hologram flickering.
The core is failing. It needs to be stabilized, but the process is complex. I can guide you, but it'll take time.
"Do it," I said. As Finch worked, the chamber trembled, and a low growl echoed through the facility.
"Something's here,"
Zrash hissed, raising his weapon. The attack came without warning. Shadows coalesced into grotesque forms, their movements erratic and unnatural. They surged towards us, their bodies flickering as it caught between dimensions. "Open fire!" I shouted, my rifle spitting out bursts of plasma. The creatures shrieked as they fell, but more took their place, their distorted limbs reaching for us with relentless determination.
Keep them off me!
Finch shouted, its hologram darting between consoles as it worked. Zarash fought with a ferocity I hadn't seen before, his bladed staff piercing through the creatures with precision. Vance held his ground, his aim steady despite his weakened state. The battle was chaotic, every shot and strike echoing through the chamber. The creature's attacks grew more frenzied as the lock's hum reached a fever pitch.
Almost there!
Finch yelled. The lock flared with a blinding light, and the creatures let out a collective wail before dissolving into nothingness. The chamber fell silent, save for the steady hum of the stabilized core.
It's done,
Finch said, its voice weary.
the lock is holding, for now.
Vance collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged. You bought us time, but it won't last. The lock needs a permanent fix. We'll figure it out, I said, though the weight of the task loomed over me. As we made our way back to the surface, the storm began to break, faint rays of sunlight piercing through the clouds. Haven had given us answers, but it also left us with a grim realization. Earth's isolation wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. Haven felt different. The storms outside had subsided, leaving the facility eerily quiet. The faint hum of the reality lock echoed through the corridors, a sound that seemed to burrow into my skull. Each step towards the lock's core felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted our intrusion.
We stabilized it for now,
Finch said, its hologram hovering at my shoulder.
but the energy output is already climbing again. The patch won't hold long.
How long do we have? I asked.
Hours? Maybe a day if we're lucky.
Vance stumbled as we entered the control chamber. His gaunt face was pale, his breath shallow. The effort of leading us through the facility, combined with the strain of his years in cryo, was catching up to him. You should have left this place buried, he muttered. The lock was never meant to be touched again. We didn't have a choice, I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. If the lock fails, the Luthane come back. What's your solution? Let it collapse? Vance's hollow eyes locked on mine. Better us than the galaxy. Zarash, trailing behind me with his scanner, hissed in frustration. Enough! This argument is irrelevant unless we survive the next few hours. What's the next move? I turned to Finch. We need options. Finch hesitated, its holographic form flickering.
There's a failsafe deep in the lock's primary core. It's designed to reboot the system and restore dimensional stability, but
Zarash pressed.
It's not automatic,
Finch admitted.
It requires manual activation. Someone has to stay behind to trigger it.
The chamber housing the primary core was a cathedral of light and machinery, towering spires of glowing conduits pulsing with energy, casting shifting shadows across the walls. At the center of the chamber stood the lock's heart, a massive, spherical construct of swirling light, encased in a lattice of blackened metal. It's beautiful, Zarash murmured, his violet eyes wide with awe.
And deadly,
Finch added.
The core's radiation levels are spiking. Whoever activates the failsafe won't survive long enough to leave.
The room fell silent, the weight of Finch's words setting over us like a shroud. I'll do it, Vance said suddenly. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. I was part of the team that built this monstrosity. It's my responsibility. No, I said, stepping forward. You've done enough. You won't make it to the console, let alone through the activation sequence. And you would? Vance shot back. I'm not dying here, I replied firmly. Finch, there has to be another way.
There isn't,
Finch said softly.
The failsafe is hardwired to prevent remote access. The engineers wanted to ensure no one could activate it by accident.
Zarash's mandibles clicked nervously. This is madness. We're debating who gets to die when we don't even know if this will work.
It'll work,
Finch said, though its voice betrayed doubt. The chamber shuddered as the lock's energy surged. The hum grew louder, its frequency erratic. We're out of time, I said, stepping towards the console. Wait, Zarash said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You're sure about this? Humans have a strange tendency to act before thinking things through. I've thought it through, I said. If this fails, Earth stays a tomb, and the Luthane are trapped. If it works? I trailed off. The truth was, I didn't know what would happen if it worked. Finch interrupted.
Adrian, there's something else.
What now? Finch's hologram flickered, its expression unusually grave.
The activation process will destabilize the lock temporarily. If the Luthanian are still alive on the other side.
They could break through, I finished.
Yes.
The activation sequence was a maze of ancient code and energy manipulation. Finch guided me through each step, its voice calm but urgent.
Powers at critical levels,
Finch said.
The failsafe's window is closing.
Vance watched from the chamber's edge, his frail body sagging against a console. You don't have to do this, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Yes, I do, I replied. The final command required a physical key, a relic from Earth's desperate last days. Vance produced it from a hidden compartment, its surface worn and tarnished. Don't let this be for nothing, he said, pressing it into my hand. I nodded, slotting the key into the console. The machinery roared to life, the lock's light intensifying until it filled the chamber. The first crack appeared in the air itself, a jagged tear in reality that shimmers with an unnatural glow. More cracks followed, spreading like fractures in glass. They're coming, Zrash whispered, his voice tight with fear. The Luthane emerged like a nightmare given form. Their bodies were amorphous, constantly shifting between shapes, their movements defying logic. They radiated a sense of wrongness, as if the universe itself rejected their presence.
Hold them off!
I shouted, my hands flying across the console. Zarash and Vance opened fire, the weapons barely slowing the creatures. Finch's voice crackled in my ear.
Failsafe's ready. You just need to hit the final command.
I hesitated, my hand hovering over the console. What happens if it works?
The dimensional barrier stabilizes, Finch said. Earth will be sealed off permanently. No one gets in or out.
And if it doesn't? Finch didn't answer. The creatures surged towards us, their forms twisting and elongating. Zarash swung his bladed staff, carving through one, only for two more to take its place. Vance screamed as a tendril wrapped around his leg, pulling him towards the tear.
Adrian, now!
Finch shouted. I slammed my hand down on the console. The chamber erupted with light, a wave of energy rippling outward. The creatures writhed and shrieked as the cracks in reality began to seal. The lock pulsed violently, its glow intensifying until it became blinding. I felt a searing heat. And then, nothing. When I awoke, the chamber was silent. The lock's light had dimmed, its surface smooth and dormant. Zarash knelt nearby, his body battered but intact. Vance? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Zarash shook his head. He didn't make it. I closed my eyes, the weight of his sacrifice settling over me. Finch's hologram flickered into view, its form unstable.
The lock is holding,
it said.
Earth is safe. For now.
For now? I repeated.
The Luthane are gone, but the lock is damaged. Its stability isn't guaranteed.
I pushed myself to my feet, every muscle screaming in protest. Then we fix it. Zarash gave me a look that was equal parts admiration and exasperation. Humans, always ready to fight an unwinnable battle. That's what we do, I said, staring at the lock. Earth's secrets were still buried, but for the first time, there was hope.